Hello and welcome again to another one of my videos. This is John at Old Nation Line. Many hesitate to get into the hobby of building models, particularly model railroading. And I have the pleasure of talking with a lot of model railroaders every day. But building things has always given people a great satisfaction in life, perhaps because that's what we're meant to do. In my case, at an early age, we'll say grade school, I had trains given to me by my elders on holidays, birthdays, and it seemed like I always had plenty of time to play or work with them. That is until high school. Between high school and going to college, like many at that age, I was short on time, money, and space. However, even though I wasn't building models, I managed to stay active in the hobby. And so I kept subscriptions to magazines like the Model Railroader and membership in the National Model Railroad Association. And with the NMRA, came the NMRA bulletins every month. At least I could afford that and dream. As it turned out, I learned a good deal from absorbing all those articles until eventually managing to build models once again. There was always the occasional visit to model railroad clubs or friends, but I did eventually get back into building my own models and kits. Without realizing it, one particular editor had a rather profound influence, not only on me, but on the model railroad community at large. And that editor would have been Whit Towers of the NMRA. Whit was president of the NMRA until 1969, and when he stepped down, he took the helm as editor of the NMRA Bulletin. His tenure lasted until the end of 1978. During his time as editor, he worked to significantly increase NMRA memberships over that period. It is typical of folks that have a passing interest in the hobby to pick up a magazine here and there, and perhaps less so today because everything is online. I still have all my magazines saved over the many years in my reference library, and I enjoy them to this day. The advantage of having the subscriptions over the 10 or 20 year period coming in monthly is to have a good feel for how the community is doing as a whole. So in this video, I would like to relate a little story to everybody as it pertained to Whit Towers and kind of honoring his leadership and work. And because I had the interest in reading the Bulletin from cover to cover, I followed certain things that made the hobby fun, even though I wasn't model building. In his tenure, I would say that the title to this video should be Why Model Railroading is Fun, at least one facet of it, and subtitle to that would be The Biffy Wars and Whit Towers. It just so happens Whit developed some controversy in the community with the membership, which I will explain in a minute. One might not pick up on it or the significance without monitoring the Bulletin month after month over those years. Like any editor, he was always looking for authors to contribute, and he was particularly probably always trying to work on the task to fill open spaces. So he had to be creative along with the technical duties required to be a good editor within his budget limitations. Early in the 1970s, Whit introduced the community to the polite term called the Biffy, slang for the outhouse or privy. Often, these would be tongue-in-cheek cartoonish caricatures or even serious modeling articles. As time progressed, readers kept noticing these showing up frequently in the Bulletin, and sometimes as jokes or just references to the privy. Now, it just so happens that if you're researching railroads in the early 1900s, your stations would have outhouses because they didn't have indoor facilities. I thought of this at the time as the Biffy Wars, because letters kept coming into the editor, which he published in the section of the magazine called Blowing Off Steam. Soon it became clear there were two camps, the pro-privy and the anti-privy people. In a word, controversial encapsulates the ongoing scene in the periodical. The arguments ranged from contentious to divisive to downright polarizing. Remember, the internet was not publicly accessible until 1991. So the evolution took time for things to heat up in a media that was paper-based periodical. And as a result, people looked forward to the magazine coming on a monthly basis to catch up on things like this. Some of the anti-privy folks wrote that unless things changed with the so-called infatuation with the Biffy, they were going to drop their NMRA membership. The pro-privy crowd always seemed to provide the best support for Whit, but lo and behold, one could not get a better education when it came to the American institution known as the outhouse. There were serious model projects published, not just about your basic Biffy, but state-of-the-art privies. Notoriety aside, the history was a large part few considered. Most rural stations with no indoor plumbing had outhouses off to the corner behind the buildings. Section crews required facilities, consideration that might be found at non-agency stations or section houses where track crews lived or worked. Like any serious modeling project, basic research is sometimes required unless one is only freelancing with no particular prototype in mind. So I suppose you have to ask the question why all this matters. In the end, the subtle conclusion one could draw is the fact that through his publishing, Whit Towers kept people involved, not only via the Bulletin, but at model railroad clubs, division, regional, and national meets. You could always hear the best Biffy jokes. It did not overwhelm the publication, it just irritated a small group of readers. It kept members going to the back pages of the Bulletin to read the latest steam people were blowing off toward the editor or perhaps each other in respectable ways. Along with the funnies that Milt Thumbs Moore created in the publication, it was entertaining. Plus, I learned so much from all the railroad documentation and model projects that it was probably the best investment I ever had in the hobby, and it kept me going. And finally, perhaps the most entertaining was the November 1978 issue where friends gathered to roast the Bulletin editor, Whit Towers, at the April 28, 1978 PCR convention in Phoenix to pay tribute to Whit. The theme was Whitney's Wonderful Water Closet Museum, billed as the world's largest collection in HO of his taboo slice of Americana. And with that, my friends, is one facet of why model railroading is fun.